Chairman King, and I will start by adding my shout out to my colleague from California, Mr. Lundgren, on the necessity of our fusion centers. There is one in the Los Angeles region as well that is very significant, and I would dare say many of the plots that have been foiled over the last years were a result of the information that was cobbled together in our fusion center. I think we, as members of this committee, ought to be very clear and very precise in advocating for the continuance of our fusion centers. I've appreciated the gentleman's testimony and your knowledge about our Department of Homeland Security and the future. I have a district that borders the largest port complex in our country, Los Angeles and Long Beach. And to that end, I have been concerned about port security. In fact, my very first hearing here in the Homeland Security Committee was the 9/11 report card. And at that time, it had come out that probably we were a little lacking. I'd like to hear Mr. Baker's grade for port security in this country. And to that end, I will say, thanks to Chairman King and a real bipartisan support, I was able to pass my first bill this year on asking the Department of Homeland Security to report back to Congress on assessment of our port security. I would love to hear your analysis of how we're doing. I tend to think it's still a very vulnerable entryway into our country through our nation's ports. Specifically, I would like to know generally how you feel about that, but specifically, speaking of managing our resources, I've heard from a number of ports across this country that the port security grants, which I'm a big advocate of, we've done things in this committee to continue port security grants, but some of the deadlines, some of the requirements, some of the burdens that apparently we're putting on port authorities to actually use these port security grants in an efficient way are hindering what I believe ultimately is the securing of our nation's ports. So I'd love to hear your assessment specifically of port security and how we're managing our port security grants.
So I can't give you much useful information about the grant management because I think I'm out of date on that. I did participate heavily in the Port Security Act process and the implementation of that, and it's been continued by the next administration. And on the whole, I would give that effort about a B. I think, given the amount of attention that has been put on that and the number of authorities, not just CBP, but also Coast Guard that are available, the Department's done a reasonably good job of trying to improve port security. One of them, obviously it has not been able to move inspection for nuclear weapons overseas the way one would like, and that isn't going to happen anytime soon, not because of incompetence on the Department's part, but because, we have to persuade our negotiating partners to do that. And one of my biggest worries is that if we're looking for nuclear weapons, which is a fundamental part of our port security program that may be smuggled into the United States, we have pretty good mechanisms, not perfect, but pretty good mechanisms for identifying those weapons if they come in containers through the ports. We are much less well protected against the possibility that someone would put that into a private jet and just file a plan for Teterboro and never get to Teterboro, just set it off before they landed in the United States. We need a whole of an approach to nuclear weapon smuggling that looks not just at ports, but at all the ways people might smuggle stuff in. The joke is the best way to get it in is to wrap it in a bale of marijuana. We need to be looking at all of those, and I think actually we've done a better job of securing our ports against that threat than most of the other mechanisms by which people would bring a nuclear weapon in.
Any other members of the panel want to speak on port security?
We issued a report specifically on the Port Security Grant Program about a year or so ago, and it highlighted some of the issues you pointed out. Specifically, it takes too long for the money to flow out to the actual recipients. I think the good news there, in a nutshell, is that FEMA and DHS are taking actions to address our recommendations. My understanding is they're starting to make progress on that, so that's good news. Second point, real quickly, is one of my colleagues from GAO, Steve Caldwell, recently testified on the overall state of port security, and I think we would agree with Mr. Baker's assessment. Generally speaking, that's been one of the relative areas of success for DHS over the course of the last 10 years.
Thank you.
Very general point, smuggling is smuggling is smuggling is smuggling, whether it's drugs, weapons, people, or whatever, illicit or even licit goods in tough areas. So one area where I think beyond just ports that we need to be doing more is we're seeing hybrid threats. Is it terrorism? Is it crime? Is it this? Is it that? At the end of the day, I think there's some real opportunity between the counter-narcotics community and the counterterrorism community to further cooperate on some of these issues because, again, the routes are going to be the same. The TTPs, the terror tactics might be the same. So how do we start bringing those worlds together?
Thank you. Yield back my time.
Time generally has expired. The now